be honest, I guess we want to be somewhere that we use and that we're proud of, and is a conducive place to recover and consult with medical staff when we're ill. But I know from talking to a lot of you locally that your real concerns are about the actual key services that we have. I know, for example, that there are just under 100 beds in Newark Hospital for a population of what is nearly 50,000 people. So I know that's a real concern. I think the overarching issue for me as well, as somebody from the NHS, is really the impact of working in a hospital or an establishment where things are gradually being depleted, where patients are increasingly either at risk or anxious about what's going to happen to them and regarding their care. So my focus on this really for Carol, if she was here really, that I think, yes, it's important. We know, and there's research to show that actually having a nice environment to recover in is actually beneficial to our health. But we need those fundamental services, and we need to be shown that we can cater for the Newark constituency. That's our hospital that we're proud of.
When I met the Hospital Trust, that was pretty much exactly what I said to them. I was concerned that, is this the best way to spend £500,000? £500,000 investment is good news for the hospital. Let's not always be negative. I think this is something that is good, but it's just the beginning, isn't it? We want to see more services, as many services that are safe to be delivered in Newark, delivered there. I'd like to see, and I have fought this in my short time as your Member of Parliament, including in my debate in the House of Commons that some of you came to attend, for an upgraded MIU. We are a growing population, we are an ageing population. The number of over 65s in this town is set to double in the next 10 years. So with new housing, we'll see young families, and we'll also see older people. A growing, ageing population needs services that are commensurate to that. The problems are multifaceted, as we all know who followed this for a long time. The hospital has suffered from a Nottinghamshire healthcare model that has developed over many years in many different governments and local administrations that doesn't work for the rural, relatively isolated nature of Newark and its surrounding communities. We've been lumped in with Sherwood Forest Hospitals Trust with an appalling PFI debt that consumes 17% of its annual budget, something that I have taken up and is now being reviewed by Jeremy Hunt, and I hope we will see progress in the next Parliament on that. So there is no easy solution, but as your Member of Parliament, I will fight for an upgraded MIU and for as many services as are safe to be delivered in Newark to be delivered here. And I will always fight for the hospital. I visit it regularly. I was there on Christmas morning. I support the staff, and I want to see a good quality, not politicised debate on the hospital, so that we can work together as a community to ensure it stays open and it thrives for many years to come.
Robert, but you can't depoliticise the dumbing down of a hospital. I'm sorry. What we have is £320 million having been spent, or in Gordon Brown's words, invested in a factory-style hospital in Sutton-in-Ashfield, which is completely distorting the clinical priorities for the Sherwood Forest NHS Foundation Trust, of which Newark is a part. When we say that we're investing £500,000 in a new waiting room, I have to compare. If you were a clinician needing to have a heart or some fracture problem needing to be resolved, what do? You send the patient to King's Mill straight away, and Newark gets ignored. I took part in a Save Newark Hospital Days action on Newark Marketplace about 3 months ago. doing nowadays, no disrespect to them, is doing diagnostics. Castle Ward's being closed. They're not actually performing any operations to speak of, and it needs to change. It should be the first port of call for local ambulances, for instance. If anybody's being picked up for a coronary problem, you shouldn't need to go to City Hospital as a matter of first recall. Go to Newark for stabilisation. £500,000, as I say, is nothing. We need to spend millions and many millions on Newark Hospital upgrading. Thank you.
Carol, for your question. I think the place we have to start on this is many people will ask why £500,000 is being spent improving a waiting room when actually the real issue in the NHS is getting a control on waiting times. Waiting times in accident and emergencies under this government, supported by Robert and supported by David, are now at a record high. People waiting over 4 hours in A&E to try and be seen by people in a hospital, record high since 2004. Hospitals are only ever as good as the services around them. Ambulance services, social care within the community, and GP services as well to then reference people onto the hospital. GP waiting times are stretching back. I met a lady the other day in the constituency who was telling me she was waiting 3 weeks to see a GP. That's the record of this government, and it's no good standing here tonight, Robert, and prevaricating about it. The Secretary of State for Health needs to intervene, needs to sort out East Midlands Ambulance Service, which has got some of the worst waiting times in the country, needs to invest in Newark Hospital, and needs to come to Newark, which he's refused to do. He came and met privately, and speak to the public and explain this simple question, which I'm asked by members of Newark constituency.
No.
Why is it acceptable for a population of 40,000 in Grantham and the surrounding area to have an accident and emergency service, a critical care unit, a maternity service, and a children's service in their hospital, but for Newark and its surrounding areas that has a comparable, if not slightly larger population, we are left without those services? Under this government, good enough for Grantham, not good enough for the people of Newark. We need a credible plan to sort out the NHS, which is why the Labour Party said that it will invest £2.5 billion, funded by a mansions tax and by levying tobacco companies, to invest in 20,000 more nurses and 8,000 more GPs. And what we've seen today from the Tories is an £8 billion pledge that is not funded and that would result in more borrowing. And I think you need to answer for that tonight, Robert.
To separate off the PFI, our part of the PFI debt, from Kings Mill. We have Grantham down the road, it's an equivalent size. They have an urgent care centre with an A&E which is level 2 that's run by a consultant with 3 other doctors. Why can't we have the same? We have 100,000 people living nearer to Newark than to any other hospital in our constituency. So we need to do this properly. It is feasible to do this, and it requires some negotiation, but we could relieve them of that part of the debt, and then we could run things for ourselves. And I was astonished to hear, to see in the paper that David Cameron, when he was interviewed at ECRING last week, was saying, when he was asked about Newark Hospital, said that it had gone into special measures, which happened 2 years ago, and that special measures were there to sort it out. Well, I'm sorry, since that happened, everything has got worse. And the hospital standardised mortality rate, which was one of the reasons why it went into special measures, has gone up from 13% more deaths expected to over 30% more deaths expected. We need to take control of Newark Hospital ourselves and get a proper service. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just, he did. Let's explain. A few years ago, when Jeremy Hunt became Health Secretary, he asked Simon Stevens, who was in fact an advisor to Tony Blair, so not by any means a Conservative Party natural supporter, one of the world's most respected healthcare leaders, to come in and be Chief Executive of the NHS. He then said to Simon Stevens, come up with a 5-year plan to develop the future of the NHS. Think about how you can use technology, think how you can improve services. I mean, I think that's great. We need to actually think of a 25-year plan for the NHS, but at least it's a 5-year plan, the first long-term plan in the history of the NHS, and then come back to us and tell us how much money you think realistically it would cost to make that plan work. So the NHS leading experts went away and came up with a plan and costed it, and came back to us and said it's going to cost at least £8 billion. And we as the Conservatives said, fine, we will find you that money in a growing economy with our track record of economic competence, and we will use it to give the NHS the money it needs. The Labour Party have said no.
Thank you.
That speaks volumes.
Thank you. A lot of those
to get a saying, often left out, but we have been in the coalition for 5 years. We've kept it stable. Right, Carol's, I believe Carol, with what she said. She went and said that £1 million extra should be spent on patient care. It should be bringing more services local. I think it's important to get more services local to your local hospital. I've used the GP walk-in service, and I found it an excellent service at the hospital. Grantham is part of a larger NHS trust. It's the Lincolnshire one. The problem you have here is you're pushed into a small NHS trust that's very much skewed because of what's happening with over at Kingsmill in Mansfield, which is the part of the Western Nottinghamshire, which is a very different demographic from what is over here. Today you're seeing the competing visions. That's what Michael's gone and said. You see the competing visions between the Conservative and Labour Party. This has been a marginal seat in the past. It's gone from one side to another. You've seen the competing visions of what they want as a future. I believe in consensus politics. That's why I'm a Liberal. But that's why I'm a Liberal. I believe in coming to some form of compromise. And I still think that we've got an influence on the Conservatives. Even we're out of coalition now, we said we were going to go and look at giving £8 billion more to the NHS because the ring fencing last time didn't work. Because social care wasn't funding, it then meant that more of the responsibility of that was then put on the NHS. And the NHS costs spiralled and there was more there. So that's why we said we needed £8 billion more. A week later, the Conservatives come out with it. We've actually, in this campaign, we've still got an influence on the major parties. And I think after this general election, we will still have an influence on the major parties.
Thank you very much. I'm getting on to the next question. It is health related.